When we think of creativity, what springs to mind? An artist painting their masterpiece in an attic, the writer beavering away on a novel, or a Hollywood film director in charge on the set? Maybe someone who works as a creative in an ad agency, a copywriter, a graphic designer, or anyone else who works in a so-called creative industry. Now, that would be a simplistic, one-dimensional view of creativity, but it's a common one, reinforced time and time again by the media. I've worked alongside countless people over the journey who would consider themselves creative, but I kind of didn't find them that inspiring or indeed that creative. Conversely, some of the most creative people I've met have been entrepreneurs and business professionals who are naturally curious and always seem to have a wellspring of interesting thoughts and ideas at the ready. So in other words, you don't have to be working in a creative industry to be a creative person. Indeed, to be effective in business today, especially when it comes to what we talk about here on the podcast, PR and marketing and building our profile and creating content, and growing our sphere of influence in the marketplace, then having a creative edge might just be the advantage you need to cut through with your content and your story and your message and your brand. Okay, so what is creativity then? Creativity is defined as the use of imagination or original ideas to create something. What does it mean to be creative, and how can we increase our levels of creativity? Is being creative something we're born with, or can we learn it, if not develop it over time? To help us come to grips with how we can be more creative in our lives, I'm joined by Dr Marion Piper, founder of Marion Piper Creative and host of the What Doesn't Kill Us podcast. Marion wears many hats, but they all involve creativity. Most often, she's a copywriter, helping people communicate with confidence and clarity. And other times, she's a creativity coach, helping entrepreneurs ignite, maintain, and execute on their ideas. Let's hear from her now. Dr. Marion Piper, welcome to the Reputation Revolution show. Great to have you in the virtual studio.
Thank you so much, Trevor. I am pumped for us to dive into one of my favourite words and topics and lifestyles of all time. So I'm ready and raring to go.
It's going to be all things creativity, not going to put you under any pressure whatsoever. But before we get going, in the intro I gave a bit of a snapshot of you, but you can tell your story much better than I can. So what are you doing at the moment? Give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch for a bit of context.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would describe myself as a multi-passionate creative. I've never been someone who's been satisfied or motivated by doing one thing day in and day out. So my current life setup definitely reflects that. So I work in my own business under the moniker of Marion Piper Creative, offering creativity coaching, art and self-care tools for people. And then I've also just recently started working as a senior copywriter for Fingerprint for Success, which is a part-time gig. And I'm really enjoying the balance between those two things. And for me, it's never a either or scenario, it's and. And that, living in the space of and can be quite uncomfortable, but also it is where creativity thrives the most, I think.
Yeah. And you as you said, you wear you wear multiple hats, you're multi-passionate, all of that sort of stuff. So, but you're essentially a copywriter, but you're also doing a creativity coaching. What's involved in what does a creativity coach do? Who would need one?
Great question. I mean, like most other coaches, it's like, everybody needs this, but legitimately, actually, we're all very innately creative, and a lot of people, particularly in business, like I do work a lot with artists, so people who are on the side of painting, drawing, performing, music, etc. But where I've sort of found there is definitely more of a need is in business, because poor creativity has been dragged into business and slapped this label on it called innovation, which has very much, I think, undermined and really ruined a lot of the beauty in the creative process when it's been shoved into a business context. Yeah. So as a creativity coach, really what I'm looking to do is to help people unlock their innate creativity to help them. The goal isn't to create more things. The goal is to get into flow more often, because I'm really interested in this idea of creative practice. So how we can show up every day in all the different parts of our lives, using creativity as the lens through which we look at everything. So it's not just about what you do, but it's about who you are, and what kind of contribution you want to make, not just to the world, but also to your own experience of what it means to be human.
Yeah. And I think it's really important, to take creativity right throughout. It's not something you switch on as you walk through the doors at the virtual doors of your business or the place where you work, and it manifests itself in so many different ways. Do you find that people suppress their creativity if they're in a professional and a business sense?
Yeah, if we think of creativity in more of a traditional sense, as how it's traditionally defined as self-expression or particularly artistry. So I definitely see in corporate, more so than anywhere else, that people tend to live these double lives where, it's kind of like reverse Superman. Like on the weekend, they're this, vivacious, creative, expressive person, and then they put on the suit and tie, and then all of a sudden they're this corporate automaton, but yet oftentimes, they might be in a digital team or they might be head of innovation, and yet they are not adding anything of themselves to their work. And so this is really one of the things that I keep harping on about, is that creativity is about self-expression, highlighting the word self. So it's really about what you believe, think, feel, particularly feel, because there's so many benefits for being more tapped into your self-expression, particularly for your mental health, but also for your physical health. Tons of research done, and it's also what I touched on a little bit in my PhD too.
Yep.
But yeah, and it makes me really sad when I hear people say like, oh, when I was when I was in school, I used to love drama, or I used to be in the art room every lunchtime painting, and then I left school and I stopped, but it used to bring me so much joy. And so I'm definitely seeing, riding the wave of the self-care trend, is that this move for people to, particularly after lockdown and COVID, they've sort of rediscovered that love and tapped back into that almost like childlike creative expression, which is so great.
TikTok.
Honestly, that platform is one of the, all of its politics aside, that platform is one of the most creative that I've seen. Like Instagram has become, I think, quite formulaic, but TikTok still is a bit more of a unruly beast, which I love.
Yeah, it's a bit of the Wild West, which it's not as well. You can't really be too. With, as you said, with Instagram, it's becoming a lot less authentic and more polished and manufactured, whereas you try that on TikTok and you won't go very far. So when we're talking about professional personal branding and building a thought leadership positioning in the marketplace, content is a big deal with that. And to do content well, and when you see someone do it really well, there is that self-expression. And so this is a direction I want to go in, because I think that when we're putting the technical term is putting ourselves out there. When we're doing that, there is a tendency to hold back, particularly if you've been, whether it's in corporate or you've been in the business trenches for a while, and over time people will start to loosen up a little bit, and that's when their content becomes really, really good, and their interaction with others on social media and all of that stuff. What's your sort of view on that with the whole content marketing side of things, and now people have got that ability to be their own, radio station or media company, or, on video or TikTok, whatever it is. Are you seeing people relaxing a little bit more and more self-expression coming out, or still the same old, they're buttoned up a little bit and a bit cautious?
Yeah, I think I see everything on the spectrum, right? But one of the things that I'm picking up, there's a lot of fear around technology, particularly in terms of content and self-expression. But where I'm actually seeing the most creative and interesting interjections is when people use new technology and new platforms to amplify their self-expression. And, you know, you just have to look at platforms like Substack, which is designed for writers, and you're getting this huge wave of actually what content originally was, which were these, you know, almost like little musings, little thought bubbles that people would share from their experience, you know, and I love that it's becoming more about, hey, I've been through this experience, here's what I've learned, and less about, oh, I've learned all these things and I've put it in my course that you can now buy. You know, so I think that there's, you know, consumers, people, all of us, we're very savvy now, and we can see through the tactics, we can see through the frameworks. We know we've been sold to 1,000 times. And so there is a lot of fatigue around that approach.
Yep.
So where I'm seeing the most interesting things happen is when people, jump on TikTok or jump on LinkedIn and start to connect the dots in their own life between their personal and their business life, and not keep them so separate anymore. And I think that's what you're meaning when you talk about the buttoned up. It's like we tend to be too much about the business and really not about the thing that the business actually is, which is the people.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that, I guess, and this is the key, is, you know, I think self-expression is a really good way to look at it. And obviously, you know, when you're creating content, that's, you know, it's creative because you're creating, but it's probably, you know, a manifestation that people can understand. But I guess even if you're going to give a talk and give a presentation at an event, or, you know, that sort of things, you can be creative in all sorts of ways. When you really dig down and look into it, you can, you know, creativity will come in because it's ideas, isn't it? So, you know, how you approach a problem, a situation, you do a talk, you do a podcast, you do an interview, whatever it is, it's, you know, looking at things in a different light.
Yeah, and I think it might be helpful too to give people a couple of definitions, or at least the ones that I tend to work on, that might help iron this out a little bit.
Go for it.
So for me, I define creativity as an organic process of connecting the dots in new and interesting ways. And what I mean about organic is that it's something that happens inside of us, as in we are organic beings. It's a process that happens in our head. It's not necessarily like, I mean, you can do it on paper, but essentially it's something that our brains do quite naturally. And it's a process that comes to us that we've been taught, that's, you know, as old as humans are. The other one is self-expression, which is really around your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs expressed outwardly about particular topics, you know. So one of the things that really not angers me, maybe frustrates me is a better word, is when I see this regurgitation that happens online of people who, you can tell which coach they're following, or you can tell which industry trend they've grabbed onto, and basically they've just used that as a template and have just changed a few of the words to make it relevant to who they are and what they do. But like you said, there are so many different ways that we can connect the dots. And I think there might be a little bit of fear around it being too exposed, or, you know, even just, you know, I haven't done that before is often a phrase that I hear a lot, that stops people from even trying a different way of doing things, because, you know, whether they're afraid to succeed, afraid to fail, there's so many different, I suppose, like beliefs and limiting beliefs that are intimately tied to creativity. But the beautiful thing is, when we start to think about it more as a process of connecting the dots, it takes a little bit of the pressure out of us having to be too original, because the new moment, the originality is in the connection. It's like that whole adage of 1 + 1 = 3. And that's really what we're going for when we start to look at the world through more of a creative lens.
And, you know, like, and if I, again, go back to content creation and creating something that's original, or, you know, you've got some ideas that you're putting out there and exploring those ideas in public. I mean, that's all, you know, to do with creativity. But I guess even curating content is, I would think, a creative pursuit. Understanding a theme and joining the dots. And I think good content curators who share a lot of good, really interesting stuff, they're joining dots as well.
Oh, for sure. And even, developing the skill to be able to not just identify how things are related, but But also then talking about, if we want to talk about from a content creation perspective, you've got how things are related, so what's similar about them. Then on the flip side, you've also got what makes them different.
Yeah.
And then also the third layer to that, if you want to go for that extra layer of newness and originality, is what do I think about those two things? So I think that's the part of the process that people often forget to do, is that they're great at curating content, they're great at pointing out what's good and what's bad and what's different, but then they forget to tell us why. And a huge part of creativity and the creative process is meaning making. If we can make something mean something to us personally, we're more likely to remember it, we're more likely to pass it on, and it's such a huge part of what it means for us to exist in this world, because if it doesn't mean anything, we're not going to care.
Yeah. And I guess when you look at that as well, you don't have to have all the answers. It's not about being the smartest person in the room.
Oh, in fact, I'd say it's the exact opposite. So one of the things that I try to do is I don't just ask questions and look for answers. I ask questions and I live into the answers. So I try as much as I can, if there's something that I don't know, and there is a lot of stuff that I don't know, I share with people how I, sort of move through that process and come to some kind of understanding. And my goal also is I don't want to answer things. I just want to open it up further and further and further, rather than feeling like I need to put a full stop at the end of every sentence. It's like, can I ask more questions? Can I invite other people in to also, share in this exploration? Because people want to be included. Your readers, your users, your audience, your clients, they want to go along on that journey with you because they want to be part of the story. And storytelling, regardless of anything that's happening in the world, with whatever threats AI and tech are bringing our way, storytelling is still the thing that I think will kind of keep us in the game.
Yep. Human connection.
Yes, yeah, because at the end of the day, even if you do run a business, you're still a person. First and foremost, you're a human, and fundamentally, we have all the same needs. So, if you're ever lost, just keep coming back to those needs.
Yeah, and asking questions, I've always felt that's part of curiosity and feeds imagination, which to me are two elements of creativity. I'm happy to be standard corrected. But in terms of asking questions, is that something that you encourage people to do? Is there a kind of a framework for doing that, or is it just more of an innate thing to just try and develop?
I don't think it's innate. I think curiosity is definitely innate. How that manifests will be different for different people depending on what their learning styles are and how they like to take in information. But I use the phrase powerful questions a lot, particularly because I'm a lifelong journaler and I do run lots of workshops around journaling. And one of the ways that I sort of invite people in to create more powerful questions is that I'll ask them, you arrive at the page and you're going to be feeling a certain way. Can you first pinpoint how you're feeling? And you can use this in any context and replace feeling with thinking or doing. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, but understanding it through the emotions is the easiest entry point, I think. So can you pinpoint what you're feeling? Look for whatever is behind that, because every emotion has an experience or a thought or a belief behind it. And then think about, ideally today, where you want to be. How do you want to feel? What do you want to be thinking about? What do you want to do? And then we reverse engineer the questions to look for evidence of other times where we've felt like that. So, for example, I'm feeling sad. I want to feel empowered. We can use a couple of different prepositions there. So why is feeling empowered important to me today? Really powerful question to ask. Why do I need to feel empowered? When in the past have I felt empowered before? And then what does empowerment look like to me is also another way to do it. So I typically, when I'm asking more powerful questions, I'll tend to lean on the what, the when, and the why. I avoid the how, because that often makes me more anxious, because then we're getting into process. And if we put the cart before the horse, we actually rob ourselves of the creative moment, because creativity is a generative process. You know, it's something that we move through and explore. It's not linear. It's not circular. It is kind of a quantum process, I believe, because we jump all over the place. We have an idea, we might see what it's going to look like, but then we need to come back and do some research, and then we might create a little bit, and then we go back, So I think there's, unlike other things in business and in life, creativity, it has certain buckets of things that you need to do, but the order in which you do those can change depending on what it is that you're trying to explore. So it's really not a one-size-fits-all framework.
Yep.
But what I find is when I ask those powerful questions, particularly as I'm moving through the process and I'm trying to unblock myself or move through things that are really difficult, it opens things up. And I truly believe that we are our own greatest guru, that we have the answers within us, because we don't live in a vacuum, and we have a whole lifetime of experiences that we can draw on. But yeah, the question is really the gateway, and it has to be open-ended.
Yeah. You mentioned about creativity and the buckets. What are some of the buckets that you're talking about?
Yeah, so like if you were to say Google, like what is the creative process? You'll have typically sort of between 4 and 6 stages. So you'll have that initial burst of inspiration. That's really like, oh, I have this idea. You'll then go about trying to do a bit of investigation. So you'll start sniffing around. You might gather some resources. Usually then what happens is that you'll start to process and digest all the information you found. So that's your incubation phase. And then once you've incubated to a certain point, you'll sort of have this like aha moment where things click together, and then you'll be like, great, I'm ready to go. And so you'll start producing. So you'll start creating. And then once you've created it to a certain point, typically you'll ask for feedback. So that's really our when we sort of open it up and share it with a few people. We might iterate a few times after that, and then usually we release it into the wild. And so that's really like I use inverted commas, the last phase. But you can sort of see, depending on what you're working on, how big it is, how small it is, who else needs to be involved. You might actually be in more than one phase at the same time, depending on what you're looking at. And one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is that they do not spend enough time in the incubation phase, because it's uncomfortable, because in the incubation phase, it asks you to do nothing. This is where you put it all down and you step away, you go reorganize your books, you color code your wardrobe, you go and clean the car, like whatever you want to do, but do these lightweight tasks so that because your brain will be connecting the dots in the background. But what I see people do is they often will blast through that straight into action, and then that's when they get stuck, because they haven't given the idea enough time to percolate.
I love that. I'm glad you brought that up, because walking is mine. I just go off and walk, or go to the gym or something like that. And I've always found that helps clear the head. But when you're sitting down there trying to nut something out, that's when it won't happen. And I mean, I've done as running PR firms and stuff like that, always having to pitch for business and coming up with big strategies. And sometimes it just doesn't come. And, you're getting closer to the pitch, and the big idea is just not coming. And the more you force it, the harder it becomes. And, I used to just go for a walk. I'd just go for a walk around the TAN, the botanical gardens, and boom, the idea would start forming. The less I thought about it, the more it came to me. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about? That's the incubation?
Yes, that is the incubation. It's like you're putting in all the nutrients, you're putting in all the ideas, you're putting in everything that needs to start baking. And I actually do use a baking analogy for this. It's like you have your list of ingredients, you have your method, you chuck it in the oven, and you don't just sit there and stare at the oven. Well, I mean, some people do, but you shouldn't. So you sit there and you don't poke at say if it's a loaf of bread that you're baking, you don't keep opening the door to look at it, right? Because it's not going to actually cook. You wander away, you do something else. You trust that your brain is going to do the work. And it does. Like, you'd be surprised. And the problem, I think, is that people get really uncomfortable with the weight, which is also why I tend to encourage people to have like one or two other projects to dip into while their brain is working, because that cross-pollination, it'll stave off some of the crazy, and then it'll also feed into the incubation that's happening in the other project.
Is it like a muscle? Not just trying to, most people aren't trying to find the big idea all the time. It's usually lots of little micro ideas and things that are percolating.
And I think I'm not sure muscle is the right word, because I don't think it's something that needs to be worked. I think it's something that really needs to be allowed. So, and I think this is part of the problem, particularly in business, and I think in the broader cultural narrative, is that there's this constant focus on do, schedule creative time, work on your ideas, hustle, do more. But a huge part of the creative process is actually surrendering to the idea, surrendering to the process, trusting in the timing. And because oftentimes, like anything that you try to force, it'll usually end up being something that you regurgitated. So what I also invite people to do is, if they are working on a new idea, to limit, once they get past that investigation phase where they've gathered their resources, don't consume anything while you are incubating and creating, because anything new you add into the mix will color whatever it is that you're creating. So, for example, if I'm writing something, if I want to write like a newsletter or a piece of content, in the lead up to that, I limit my social media usage. I won't read anybody's newsletters. I will try and come at it with as fresh eyes as possible, because that's what really kicks in. If you don't do that, then you're just going to keep regurgitating everything that you've taken in.
That's a really good point. I hadn't ever thought of that. I always thought, the more influences and everything, maybe the better. But it makes sense if just letting things. And the word I use, you use incubate, I use percolate.
Perfect. Perfect.
That's it's almost what you don't do is really the powerful thing.
Absolutely. I actually wrote about this a little while ago as a cheat sheet for people when they are, in the depths of the creative process. As I created this list of 12 things it was 13 things, because 13's lucky, to stop doing. It's like stop second guessing yourself, stop looking for inspiration. You're inspired enough. Stop reading people who are doing the same stuff as you. There's so many different things that we need to stop doing, because also too, like, our lives are so busy, our lives are so full enough already. And when you take in too much, when you consume too much, it actually waters down and quietens your internal voice. And that is the thing for self-expression that is the most important. And really, it's like you can't create and consume at the same time. So it's one of those funny little paradoxes. Yeah. So you kind of have to stop one to start the other.
Don't look for inspiration.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that everyone does that.
Yeah, because we love the buzz, right?
So they go searching for it.
Yeah. We love the buzz. But, I think it was Picasso was really, a man of many things, but he did have a saying that said inspiration will come, but it better find you working. So the inspiration will land when you start creating. It's not something that you can find and then grasp and feed into what you do, but it's something that will find you when you're in the depths of the process.
With the, the whole thing of perfectionism. So when you were just saying that, and I was thinking about, writing, some people are, perfectionists, and they edit as they write and they try and get it as perfect as possible and that side of things. Whereas, the wisdom is that you just write and go back and edit. You edit something to make it brilliant. You don't actually write something brilliant in the first place. Is that the sort of thing you're thinking of?
Absolutely. So this is that whole create versus consuming idea. Your first job as a creator, as a creative human, is to get it out. We don't want to go into the creative process with an editor's mindset, because then we won't produce anything. And even if you can outsource that editing, even better. But I always err on the side of overproducing rather than underproducing, because you just never know when something might be usable in a different context or in a future project, which is, lots of people are hoarders for stuff. Like I'm a hoarder for creative ideas and phrases and sentences. So my toxic trait is journals. So I just have books and books and books full of stuff. But you'd be surprised. So I never really feel like I need to worry about writer's block or creative block, because if I do stop, usually it means I'm either tired, I'm either hungry, I need a glass of water, or I just need to go back and look at what I've just done, or look at a past book to sort of kickstart the engine again. But yeah, the editing thing is interesting because you really can't. They're two different parts of the brain too. So you probably give yourself an aneurysm if you try to do both at once.
I've been there. In terms of, so you said earlier that curiosity is innate within all of us, but I've written articles about. I think curiosity is the best attribute that we can have as a. If we're talking business or entrepreneurship or something like that, having that curiosity, and so we've all got it, but some people are more curious than others. Is that because they're just naturally more curious, do you think? Or I believe they've developed it over time, because it's just, you take, we've talking about sources of inspiration and everything, but if you read broadly, if you take notice of little things, I say becoming an informational bowerbird and collecting all of these things and joining them together, and that's what keeps things interesting. Is that's just my take on it. I'm not sure if that's correct, but what's your take on curiosity? How important is it, do you think, in business today and career?
Yeah, so I actually think of curiosity less as a trait. I do believe it's something that lies dormant within us, regardless of whether or not we use it. But I've come to understand it more as a habit. So how we can get into the habit of things like asking more questions, following our intuition for things that get us excited. Things that encourage us to lean forward, not lean back. Trying new things is huge for curiosity. Putting yourself in a position where you have to be the beginner again forces you to really, really dig a bit deeper, maybe get a little uncomfortable, and ask those questions because you don't know. So pretty much any situation where you find yourself saying, "I don't know," that's the invitational thread to be more curious. And I mean, there's lots of, depending on what context you're talking into, you can, there's so many different things that you can do to invite that in. Even just saying to, the people in your life, at work, at home, I want to be more curious. What do I do? Asking them what their relationship to curiosity is as well. We don't have to do this one on our own.
I feel that I'm pretty curious because I just go down rabbit holes, and I as I said before, an informational bowerbird. I collect things, snippets and ideas, and join them together at some point. Often they don't all join together, of course. But I like the idea of, I learned so much more when I allow myself to go down rabbit holes. Now that's mostly going to be internet, but allow myself, to watch videos and listen to podcasts and follow a thread wherever that thread may be. And I've found that my best ideas come from out of nowhere, because I'm not going into it with any expectations, just following the thread wherever that may be, down a rabbit hole. We're told not to do things like that. Often in business, don't go down rabbit holes, guard your time, block your time out and do this and that, as you alluded to before, have some creative time. But I find the most fascinating part that, and because when if I was running an agency and I had people and doing things all the time, I probably didn't do that as much as I do now, or I'm in a better position to be able to do research and to go down rabbit holes and to connect dots and stuff. And I just find it a fascinating approach, but that works for me. It might not work for everyone.
Yeah, and I think one of the most underrated things that that you can do for your curiosity and even for your creativity is just take some time out to think.
Yeah.
You know,
Shock horror.
I know it's such a simple thing, because remember, you know, if we want to engage in this organic process of connecting the dots in new and interesting ways, we have to think about things. We have to focus on things. We have to, we have to go on our own little mini internal rabbit holes to ask ourselves, you know, what is this thing? Why is it important? How does it work? What can I do with it? What's missing? What don't I know? You know, and that's, you know, it seems luxurious, but in today's world, you know, especially as tech gets better, it's going to buy us more time rather than getting, you know, caught up and swept up in the latest craze. You know, could you over lunchtime, instead of listening to a podcast, just go for a walk and have a think, or even just sit there and stare at the clouds for 10 minutes and let your brain just open up and take you where it wants to go. So I think it's an incredibly important part of the process to not just, block out the doing time, but block out the being time. To explore the things that interest you and that tickle your fancy, and, you know, because at some point, somewhere, somehow, that dot will connect to something else, and we don't know what that dot is going to be. We don't know what that connection needs to be, but we do ourselves a great disservice if we don't actually put the dot on the map in the first place. Yeah. You know?
We've used a lot of the connecting of dots, joining of dots, that sort of thing, which, you know, is fascinating in business, life, art, everything, isn't it, really? But, creating content and stuff. But if I look at, you know, people building a thought leader brand, and they're true thought leaders, you know, you have the experts who go deep into their topic and they understand it, and they're less about joining dots because they understand and they're best practice. Thought leaders are probably pushing the boundaries of thought, exploring ideas in public. They're connecting dots that may seem unrelated to some people. They take information and they put a new layer of thinking on it. And that's what keeps us interesting, keeps life interesting, I think. Those sorts of people then are probably very highly creative, whether they consider themselves creative or not. You get those books that really challenge us, and when they paint a picture of what's possible and take us down a different road and maybe change the way we think about a topic or an issue, to me that's very much creativity.
100%. You know, and I feel like we are so lucky to be existing in this timeline at this time and space, because we have so many incredible examples of creativity and the creative process that exist in so many different ways, from, you know, startups that, you know, take two separate things that shouldn't go together and they put them together, and all of a sudden they've invented an entire industry, for example, you know, or somebody who just, they see a problem and they say, that shouldn't be like that. It should be easier. Or it can be better. And then they go on their own journey to figure out how to do that. You know, so creativity is both, yes, it's connecting the dots, but it is also inherently a problem-solving strategy. Yes. Yeah. Even from a content perspective, you know, the problem that we're trying to solve is like, how do I get what's in my head into the brains of other people so that they understand and can see me and my internal world makes sense. You know, so that we can connect. Again, there's that connect word, right? But it's through a different process. Yeah,
and asking the question, what if?
That is one of my absolute favorite creative questions, and it can unlock way more than we even know. But I'm also glad. I'm actually really glad that you mentioned, this idea of what's possible. Because oftentimes with creativity, like if we don't have that dot inside our head, in our brain already, if we don't have that on the map, sometimes we don't even know that is an actual possibility in the world. So This is why self-expression is so important. It's because if people don't share the process or the journey behind how that dot came to be or how those connections happened, we just miss out on so much information. And it allows, that's what I believe is part of that process of human progress, right? Is that it's not just about getting somewhere, but it's about unlocking and understanding how we got there. Because every time we do that, we get faster, better, more efficient, and we understand how those changes happen, which I think is, just that's also another part of human curiosity.
We're seeing it a lot now at the moment in startup culture about building in public.
Yes.
And, building idea. But then you get the artists who explore ideas in public, and Austin Kleon, I like him as an author, but he's got a book called Share Your Work, I think is the one I'm talking about. And, putting your work out there, he talks more about the, people who are creatives and stuff, but putting your work out there and getting people talking about it and, sharing the process, not the end result necessarily. People, and you're right. We live in an amazing time when we can do that, and now we're seeing that. But if you go back 10, 15 years, people weren't, even before blogging, they weren't doing that. And so it was a guarded secret, and everyone was secretive of how they did something. And as we know, the people that are commanding huge audiences and things are taking us behind the scenes and showing us how they've come up with ideas, and they're getting on podcasts and explaining it and all of that sort of stuff.
Oh, for sure. And even what we're doing here by talking about how this concept and what we think it is and how we've come to understand it is part of that subculture that's happening, right? And that's why I think podcasting has exploded so much. Is because there is we're all living our lives day in, day out, and we live in the process. Life happens in the process. It doesn't happen in the destination or the product.
Yep.
And also too, like when you achieve something, you achieve it and it's over. But with a process, you can actually go back and look at it. You can study it. You can repeat it. You can change it. You can morph it. It just has so much more potential than just focusing on outcomes. And also too, a huge, I mentioned this before, and I just want to reiterate this, is that creativity is a generative process, right? So if we start with the end in mind, which is what unfortunately happens a lot of the time when people are starting businesses or, building products, we actually block ourselves from what's possible. So it's like you might go into a new business venture thinking, I want to make this much money, but actually you make that much money and you slow down. However, had you have, pushed yourself or looked for another example of somebody else that's done bigger, or maybe even just been like, actually, we're just going to focus on building the best profitable, viable thing, maybe that might have unlocked 4 times as much revenue, So there is really a merit with focusing on and prioritizing the process as opposed to the destination, particularly in business, I think.
And generative is a word that we probably didn't really hear all that often, and now it's all to do with AI is generative, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's learning on the fly, it's creating as it goes, and I think that's why people get so threatened, is because they focus too much on the end result and not enough on the process. Whereas the AI is all process. All process. And that's why it's so scary, is because process is uncertain and unknown, because you can map it out, you can map out a process down to the T, and things can still go completely wild. Because
probably will.
and again, because we're creatures, we're not machines. Machines have machines, if you give them an outcome that and a process, they will just done. But humans, we have emotions, we have feelings, we have different energy levels, we have different beliefs and thoughts and experiences, and so all that stuff colors the process. Which is why it's so hard to oftentimes plan things out and have it, go according to plan. Because sometimes it might also happen quicker than you think too.
Yeah, of course. And so we're really thinking here about thinking big. And one of your sayings, or not sayings, but a sentence out of one of your blogs is, when you identify as a creative being, the world becomes your canvas. So I love that. It's really about, it's almost still, when you're living a creative life, you're going down the road less travelled to a large degree, aren't you? And creating your own canvas in that regard.
Yeah, and one of the question that I live into and have been living into for the last sort of 5 or 6 years is, what does it mean to live a truly creative life? I'm not really after the achievement. I'm not really after the checklist. But how can I create a life as I go that makes me feel fulfilled, that allows me to contribute to the world, that, produces meaningful work, that facilitates greater connections of more dots, that puts more dots on my map as I go, and I think there's something really, really wonderful happens when you embrace the wonder and awe of, the future. I don't know what the future is, that in itself is a really exciting thing. Anything could happen, and that for me, it's taken me a little while to get excited by that. For a long time, it really cut me at the knees because I was like, oh God, what's going to happen? But now I'm definitely a lot more embracing of that uncertainty. And I'm constantly always surprised by the opportunities that come my way when I embrace that mindset, rather than give myself a set of instructions that I want to be in this place in 5 years, because it kind of cuts off a lot of options when you do that.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So in terms of, the biggest, there's been a number of takeaways, and thank you for your time, Marion. But one of the big things that I'm getting out of this, and a key takeaway, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say for people is really just allow things to happen a little bit more. We run at 100 miles an hour now. We take information in like it's going, out of fashion, and we're always connected, and allow ourselves some time to disconnect and to do stuff, to think, not even to think, to walk or to, sit and watch the clouds, as you say, and just let things just percolate. Is that a daily habit we need to get into? Is that something that we can do on purpose, or it's something that's just going to happen if we put our mind to it?
I think it's a little of both. One of the first things is instead of reacting to everything that happens to you and in every part of your environment, could you pause instead and maybe wait to respond? And this is what mindfulness is built on. So I think that there's a lot of overlaps between creativity and mindfulness, very, very much so. They're very, very closely related concepts. And I think it's something that is a very small interjection into your day. I don't think you have to block out on the calendar thinking time. But even just catching yourself when you're making your morning coffee and just staring off into the distance for a little while, it just gives you a little bit more space, because that's the goal, right? Our lives are so cluttered and so chaotic that oftentimes we forget to leave blank space, but oftentimes it's in that space that your brain actually does all those beautiful connections.
Yep.
And the other key word to remember here, or to start to embrace, is a trust in the process. So
Yep.
Trust that the idea will come, trust that you have everything that you need to complete it, and trust that it'll be well received. There's a really beautiful energy and power behind an intention of trust, when we trust the world, when we trust each other.
I like it. And give yourself permission to wander.
Absolutely.
Give yourself permission to let your mind wander. Don't necessarily bring it back and then, I've got to do something else.
Exactly.
Awesome. Time has flown. What's the best place for people to connect with you? Your Instagram is terrific, and your website, no doubt.
Yes. So I'm marionpipercreative.com, and then at Marion Piper Creative on Instagram. So they're definitely the places I lurk the most.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time, Marion. Or Doc Mad.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been so great to be here. And my DMs are always open if anyone wants to jam out on this stuff. So don't be shy.
Don't be shy. Thank you very much.